If you're coming with us and you're a guest for the first time, I just want to tell you that I'm excited that you're here. If you're walking through Christmas time and you're like, okay, I know what to expect. Christmas, we're going to talk about the baby Jesus and wise men and shepherds and Marys and Joseph and all that other stuff. We've kind of taken a different perspective. And as Joe and I were talking, the good-looking guy here who leads worship, and we were talking, I said, Joe, let's do something different. Last Christmas, we kind of did something different. What we did is we called it a waiting for series. We basically looked at what were the things that people were waiting for before Jesus Christ was ever born. So we kind of went all the way back and then moved forward. And I said, Joe, what if we did it the other way? What if we go all the way forward and then go backward? What if we do kind of Christmas in rewind? That's what it's called, Christmas rewind. We're kind of taking the story and going in reverse. Really, there's kind of 4 acts of Jesus Christ, if you will, if you think of them like a play. Right? Scene 4, which is what we covered last week, was about Jesus Christ's second coming. And we said when we see that Jesus Christ is not just a wimpy kid, he's a warrior king. And then this week we're going to look at the resurrection. Next week we'll look at the death of Jesus Christ. And then the following week after that we will look at the birth story, Jesus' incarnation. And I think when we have this different vantage point, this different perspective, we're going to come at it with a new insight, kind of a fresh look at things. Not that the story is changing, but the way we look at it changes. And I think it'll change our view of Christmas a little bit. Because I think at times we become very sentimental with the baby Jesus. And we don't realize that this baby grew to a man, died on a cross, rose from the grave, and is coming back. So reordering things, going in reverse, I think will give us a fresh perspective and not just a sentimental view of who Jesus Christ is, but a reverential view, an awe-inspiring, submissive view of who Jesus Christ is. And I want to talk about, this week is his resurrection, the most pivotal event in really history. I mean, Jesus is a dominant historical figure. No matter if you are a skeptic, you're a believer, wherever you are in the spectrum, you cannot deny Jesus is a dominant historical figure. One Yale historian said that Jesus Christ has been the center of Western history for 20 centuries. 20 centuries, Jesus Christ has been the center of history. That's pretty remarkable. Especially because Jesus Christ wasn't a ruler. He wasn't even really an official religious teacher. He didn't come from the religious establishment. He was more of a renegade, more of a revolutionary. But his revolution really was through teaching, and his teaching only lasted about 3 years. We don't really know what happened with him as a child or what happened to him in his 20s. We just know from about 30 to 33, that's it. And he was a poor peasant on the outskirts of religious tradition. And yet he's the dominant figure of history. Why is that? I mean, if you think all the way back 20 centuries, you think the person who'd have the most influence and most impact would be the Roman emperor, Tiberius at the time. Tiberius, the Roman emperor, the most powerful man in all of ancient history, right? The most powerful man, at least in the first century. This man has 10 sources, 10 authors that speak about him after his death, about 150 years after his death, 10. Now there's, of course, more, but in the burning of Rome, they lost a lot of their historical documents. But you think 10 sources speak about the most influential man in that time. But yet Jesus Christ has 4 times the amount of sources that speak about him. We're talking about a peasant rebel who was killed on a cross. More people talk about him than the Roman emperor. That'd be like more people talking about me than the president. Now, that doesn't make sense. Why? Why is Jesus fixed at the center of history? Why? It's because of what he did. Right? We can look back 500 years, even 50 years, and we can see some dominant historical figures. We can go all the way back to Martin Luther. Right? What has kind of put him in history? He nailed the 95 Theses, right? Started the Protestant Reformation. He'll be known in history for that one moment. Take a guy like Abraham Lincoln, Gettysburg Address, Emancipation Proclamation. This guy changed America, right? That event right there solidified him. Or Dr. Martin Luther King, just recently, right? He's known for his dream speech in the Million Man March. But Jesus Christ has not been forgotten for 20 centuries. Why? It's not just because of a speech. It's because he resurrected from the dead. That's why he's fixed right at the center. I want you to go into your bulletin and find, kind of in there, you'll see some inserts, there's some notes, and we'll get to what these other kind of things that are in there. But I want you to find it where we have some Bible passages there on the front. You're going to see, you open up, there's life group questions, and in the backside here, there's room for notes. You're going to see there's a big idea there. I want you to do something. Take the pen out of the seat back in front of you, and I want you to write down this one bit of note right here. If you're not going to take any notes, please just take this note. It's very small, very simple. What are we going to learn about Jesus Christ this morning? We're going to learn this. Jesus Christ is a resurrected revolutionary. Jesus Christ is a resurrected revolutionary. Very simple. This guy changed the landscape. I mean, he changed everything. And I want to show you, let's go to this passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, starting with verse 1. Now, what I'm going to do is I have the passage right here, but I brought my Bible, and I brought my Bible because, and you'll see when we go through the service, not everything is going to be on this paper, and not everything is going to be on the screen. You're going to need one of these books, a Bible, in order to navigate. Okay, so if you don't have one, I would love to give you one. You can take one when you leave the service right there. You can see on those bookshelves, we replace those. We keep refilling those. Take one, grab one. Or if you don't have one, you don't want to get one there, you can get one from me for free. I'll meet you at the information center. You say, hey, Paul, I need a Bible. Awesome. Grab it, take it, and keep bringing it back with you because you're going to need it to navigate through the service. So go to 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Let's look at Jesus Christ, the resurrected revolutionary. Jesus Christ, the resurrected revolutionary. Look at 1 Corinthians 15. We're going to start with verse 1. Paul's going to talk about the centrality of this idea, that this is the center point event, that if this happens, then everything is different. Look what he says in verse 1. It says, now I would remind you, brothers, of the gospel, that means good news, this good news I preached to you, which you received, in which you stand and by which you are being saved. He's talking about the whole of who they are. I preached the gospel, the good news of the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, and you understood it. That's in the past. You received it. You're believing it, right? You're standing here, and it is saving you. You are being saved. There's a full process here. You're holding on to this idea. It's not just one moment, but it's a lifetime of belief in this and how that changes your life. And by which you were being saved. Go down to verse 2, second half. If you hold fast to the word I preached to you, unless you believed in vain. See, Paul's writing to them because they're almost deviating. They're going off track. They're not holding on to the message they first received. And what's happening in the Corinthian church right now is they're stopping belief in the resurrection. They're looking at all the teaching that they're getting from Paul and the apostles and different people, and they're saying, you know what? We don't think this resurrection piece is very important. In fact, we just don't believe that it's true. We don't believe that we will resurrect from the dead. And Paul stops. He kind of pumps the brakes. And he says, hold on, guys. You take the resurrection out, the whole thing falls. That's like the bottom Jenga piece right there. You pull it, everything falls apart. And you'll see later on in 1 Corinthians 15, if you dive into that with your life group, you'll see this is exactly what Paul says. He says, this is important. I mean, if you remove this, everything collapses. Now, on the other hand, if this thing stays there and it stays in place, then everything holds together. I mean, think about it. If Jesus Christ really rose again from the grave, you got to believe everything he said. I mean, if he really was dead for 3 days and came back to life and he said, I'm God with you, you got to believe him. Now, on the other hand, if Jesus Christ did not raise from the grave, then who cares what he said? Why worry about that? It's not okay that we could just say, hey, you know, Jesus is just a good religious teacher. We'll take some of his principles. No, this teacher said he would rise from the grave. And if he didn't, then he's a liar. So how can I trust him? He's not a credible witness anymore. He'd be thrown out in a court of law. He's not a good witness to truth if he lied about the center of what he taught. So Christianity hinges on this moment right here. If he rose from the grave, you got to believe everything he said. And if he did not, then stop coming to church. Right? Why go? In fact, that's what Paul's going to say. If he didn't rise from the grave, then we are fools to believe. And we should not be believing. We should be pitied above all men because we believe a lie. If the resurrection is not true, there's no reason to devote yourself to anything this book has to say. But look at how Paul is going to convince them that this is important. Look at verse 3. Paul is basically, again, putting at the center, Jesus Christ is resurrected from the grave. And what we're going to see here is, as he unpacks these verses, is that the resurrection was early eyewitnesses testifying to something incredibly unexpected. Early eyewitnesses testifying to something that was incredibly unexpected. All right, let's first take that idea of early. Look at verse 3. Paul said, I delivered to you as of first importance. Again, he's saying this is high priority. He's not just talking about the chronology of how he delivered it. Like, this is the first thing I said to you. Hi, my name is Paul. Jesus rose from the dead. That's not what he's saying. He said, this is the most important teaching I ever gave you. This was of first importance. What I also received. Take your pen and circle that word, received. This is very important. Paul is saying and writing this document very early after the death of Jesus Christ, and he's saying, I've received something. Right? I've received a tradition of teaching. And then what he's about to say is most likely oral tradition. Now for us, we live in a digital age. We type emails, we send texts, everything is written down, documented, or on the internet. Well, back there in first century Palestine, they didn't have Facebook, right? They didn't have Google Drive. They didn't have all these things. How do you make tradition stand, oral tradition? I mean, most people in culture were illiterate at that time. They couldn't read or write. So what they would do is they would speak the stories, and they would spread. And when it was historical, when it was tradition, when it was facts, they made sure that all the details were correct. And what we're going to right now is oral tradition. This is probably a creed or a statement that helped people that could pass along. Look at what he says. I received this tradition, I received this. Then it says that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the scripture, but that he was buried and that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the scripture. Now, do you see that? It's kind of got a rhythm to it right there. This and this happened according to the scriptures. This and this happened according to the scripture. Almost feels like a poem. There's a rhythm to it. Most scholars would agree, even those skeptical of Christianity would say this is probably a creed, an oral tradition that's been passed down. And Paul is citing it right here. Which means if he received this, he probably received it when he met with Peter and with James. Which means that would put this tradition, this oral tradition, this creed, 5 years after the death of Jesus Christ. 5 years. And why is that important? It's because the early church testified to this. Jesus died and came back to life. It wasn't a myth that built later. It's not like all these events happened with Jesus. He was a good teacher. He died. And then after tradition and tradition and tradition and tradition, time and time and time and time and time, myth started to set in. Okay, now Jesus, he didn't die. No, he conquered death. And in fact, he performed these miracles. And as time went on, the supernatural crept in. That's not what happened in Christianity. From the very beginning, from the very onset, from its inception, the resurrection of Jesus Christ was the central message. Paul testifies to it. That oral tradition right there testifies to it. And all of the documents that we have that speak about first century Christianity, that was the center of the message. Very, very early. But more than just early. It was from eyewitnesses. Look as it continues to say, this tradition. Christ died and he came back to life. Look at verse 5. He died and was raised from the dead in accordance with the scripture, and that he appeared to Cephas, who is Peter, and then to the 12, and then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. Now, this right here has got to be one of the stupidest things you could say if you are trying to lie to people. Because look at what he just opened them up to. Paul is saying, guys, there are witnesses, eyewitnesses. I'll name you a few. I mean, if you want to get away with a crime, you would want to say all the people that were there to testify. Because if you're lying, all those witnesses will say, this guy's wrong. But he's saying, hey, James, the brother of Jesus, yeah, he was there. Oh, Peter, yeah, he was there. All the 12, and he says the 12, so they're probably already known as the apostles. So we have 14, or really 13, right there. You have 13 people you would call, and then he says 500 people saw the resurrected Jesus Christ in the city of Jerusalem. If you're trying to lie, don't say that. It'd be like me coming to you and say, hey, guys, I grew up in Ventura, California. It's about 2 hours away, depending on traffic, of course. And I want you guys to know that I was the star running back in high school. Don't laugh. This is a true story. You don't believe me already, okay? And I said, I was the star running back, and I was so good. I mean, I rushed for 5,000 yards in one season, and then the state championship, I had 5 rushing touchdowns by myself, and there was a stadium of 500 people there. Now, you already are skeptical, right? No, you were the water boy, maybe, right? Yeah, maybe you used to hem the jersey of the running back, but there's no way that's true. And all you would have to do is what? Go drive. Go to Ventura. And let me tell you, you're not going to find one person to corroborate that story. Not one witness will tell you that. But this is what Paul is basically inviting them to do. And travel back then was pretty easy. Under the Pax Romana, right, the peaceful time, roads were awesome. There was a time of peace. Travel in the Mediterranean world was easy and it was safe. So he just invited them to disprove everything. Why would he do that? Why would he do that? Historically, even those skeptical of Christianity admit to this. The early church and its eyewitnesses believe that Jesus Christ rose from the grave. It's undeniable. It's just historical fact. Now, they may say they had delusions or hallucinations or whatever, but nobody denies the fact that the early church really believed, and its eyewitnesses from the very early setting there, that Jesus Christ rose again from the grave. Let's keep going. It says, and then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. And then he appeared to James, and then to all the apostles. Now stop right here. Circle that name James right there. This one's important. I think this is really significant that James is in here. Now, who is this guy? Why would he mention him? I think he mentions him because this is kind of more of a personal anecdote we can jump into. We could kind of put ourselves in James's shoes. Now, James is the brother of Jesus Christ. James, the brother of Jesus Christ, was very skeptical of Jesus. The gospel writers, even if you don't believe they're inspired, are still considered historical, reliable documents. They talk about James, and James did not believe. I can agree with James. How convincing would your sibling have to be if they said, hey, Paul, I want you to know, we've been siblings, brothers and sisters, for a long time. I'm the son of God. Probably the person that has the hardest time to convince me would be my sister. Right? And the same thing with your sibling. What would it take for your sibling to convince you that they were God? Now, I'm sure we've all had siblings who acted like they were God. Right? But what would it take for your sibling to say, I'm not only perfect, I'm not only morally without fault, I am the divine Son of God sent here to save the world from its sins, including you. That's a tough sell right there, right? And James didn't believe it. In fact, a lot of Jesus' brothers and sisters and family members didn't believe it. See, this is something that I think we miss sometimes. We almost think that this event was expected, that the first century people were just incredibly gullible people. Right? That they didn't have the scientific method. So people in the first century, they're believing in magic, they're believing in myth, they're believing in different gods. And so if somebody came with a story that somebody died and came back to life, they're so gullible they would have believed it. And C.S. Lewis, I love how he phrases this, he calls that chronological snobbery. Basically saying, hey, I'm further along in the timeline, so I'm smarter than you. And that is not really fair to the first century cultures. An extensive study of the worldviews in the first century basically tells us this. A resurrection from the dead is just as unacceptable, just as unbelievable, just as unexpected as it would be now in the 21st century. You look even the Greek culture, right? The Greek kind of worldview. They believed that your body was bad, but your soul was good. And really, the greatest goal in life was to free your soul from its body. For your soul to go back into your body and it be revived was just unthinkable. Now, maybe we'd say, okay, so the Greeks wouldn't believe it. They would see that as just really despised, and they wouldn't want that. They want to be freed from the body. They don't want to have a resurrected body. But maybe the Jews were more gullible to this. I mean, most of the first century church was Jewish. So would the Jews be more susceptible to believe in this myth? The answer is no. The Jews did believe in a resurrection, but they thought it would come at the very end of history. That God would wrap up everything, fix everything, all sin, all disease, all decay, all everything. He would resurrect the world and then resurrect everybody. But now a resurrection in the middle of history for one person is inconceivable. There's nowhere that we can find in first century Jewish writings that that was an expectation. In fact, we see this in Jesus' followers himself. You're going to go through this in your life group, but you're going to see a lot of passages. Each time Jesus mentions his resurrection, the disciples don't get it. They have no clue. Why? Because they didn't expect it. In fact, one of Jesus' followers, the first person to come to the empty tomb, do you know what he said? She said? First person to come. You would think if they're gullible, if they're expecting this, they would run up, see the stone rolled away, there's no body in there, what would they think? If they were expecting it, hey, everything he said was true. He resurrected from the dead. Was that the conclusion? No. Somebody stole the body. That's in John chapter 20, right there in the scriptures. They were not expecting it. Same thing for James. Same thing for Jesus' brother. They were not expecting it. They didn't think this was going to happen. But then we see later on, James becomes a leader in the church. In the book of Acts, in Acts chapter 15, he's a dominant figure. He became a believer. Now, what would do that? What could explain that? That James' whole thinking, and really all of Jewish culture's thinking, changed in a moment. We're talking a radical worldview change. The idea of a resurrection in the middle of history was inconceivable. Even more than that, worshiping a man was inconceivable. No Jew would tell you that God's going to come down in human form and then we should worship him. That's called blasphemy. That's why they crucified Jesus. They crucified Jesus because he claimed to be the Son of God, and they said, you can't do that. The high priest even ripped his clothes and said, this is outrage. This is blasphemy. And yet, almost overnight, hundreds, thousands of Jews changed their worldview in a moment. Now, what would cause that? What would do that? Right? Well, if we look at history, we do see worldviews changing. But it takes time. It takes debate. It takes discussion. It's not a moment where it happens. What would explain that? You know what would explain that? Seeing a dead guy come back to life. That'll change your worldview, right? That'll change your perspective. That'll change you from James looking and saying, I'm skeptical. I know this guy. Right? I remember changing his diapers. Right? I know this guy. And you're telling me he's the Son of God, but yet James changed his worldview, and even more than that, he died for it. He died for it. Now take that one. How much of a hard sell will that be? Let's say my sister, Chris, love her. She's an awesome person. My sister Chris comes up to me and says, Paul, I am daughter of God. I'm the daughter of God, fully divine. I've never sinned in my life. Okay, already I'm like, no, I'm thinking of stuff right now. What about this and this and this and this? Remember when you locked me in the refrigerator? Do you remember when you put me in the washer? Right? I'm just producing all this evidence. But she says, okay, I'm the Son of God. I'm here to save the daughter of God. I'm here to save the world from its sin. And I'm going to die, and I'm going to come back to life. And then this message right here, that I'm giving you, I want you to hold on to it so tightly that you'll die for it. Like, I'm not dying for that. I remember learning this very young when I was a kid. And I'll just be honest with you, going to be open here. Confession of a pastor. My two biggest sins were anger and lying. It's true. When I was in elementary school and junior high, I lied all the time. I did. I lied to my friends. I lied to my family. I was a bad kid. I needed Jesus. But I learned this principle, and I think we all know this. If you've ever told a lie, you lie to help yourself, right? You don't lie to hurt yourself. Now, that doesn't make sense. Right, the moment the lie is unraveled and it's only going to hurt you, what do? You abandon it. Right? We saw this with Watergate, right? With Nixon's campaign. How long did it take for that thing to unravel? 2 weeks. 2 weeks. And what did the whistleblower say? He said, hey, I had to do something to save my own skin. The lie wasn't helping him. So when the lie stops helping you, what do? You abandon it. But for some reason, the first century church held on to this till their death. Till their death. James did it. All the apostles, except one, did it. And he died a peaceful death in exile. All of them were willing to die for this. Now you may say, well, yeah, Paul, there's a lot of martyrs. I mean, we all know this. September 11th. Some men of some religious conviction took 2 planes and drove them into our Trade Center. And they died for their faith. Does that mean it's true? No. But there's a big difference between them and the first century followers. See, those men that lost their life, they believed that what they held on to was true. They believed somebody else's testimony. The disciples, it's not the same way. They knew it was true. They were eyewitnesses to the fact. These martyrs were not. They never met Muhammad. They've never seen Allah. They didn't get the Quran. They were believing a testimony way over here. They believed that what they said was true. But these first century followers would have known it was true or a lie. But these men died for that. You don't fabricate a lie to hurt yourselves. And that's all they experienced. I think this is something we ignore in history. You realize that the first century church, the second century church, the third century church was persecuted over and over and over again until the Edict of Milan in 313. 300 years the church was persecuted, and yet it didn't die. Why? Because it wasn't based on a lie. It wasn't based on a lie. And that's why James can change his whole perspective on his brother, because he saw him come back to life. Radically changed the landscape, brought a revolution to the Jews, brought a revolution to James. And another man that brought a revolution to you. Look at this, lastly. Look at verse 8. Paul now makes this personal. First he cites James, and we can look and say, what would it take for you to be convinced that your sibling was the Son of God? What would it take for you to believe? Or what do you think it would take for somebody who was a persecutor of the church, loved to kill Christians, saw it as his religious duty before God himself? What do you think it would take for that person's life to be changed? That's exactly what happens with Paul. Paul saw the risen Jesus Christ, and everything changed. Look at how he describes it. Look at verse 7. Then he appeared to James and then to all the apostles. Last of all, as one untimely born, he appeared also to me. Now I want you to stop right there. There's a phrase there, as one untimely born. I want you just to underline that, okay? Just underline that right there. This is important. That is confusing if you read it in the English. What do you mean, one untimely born? Okay, maybe he's just talking about the chronology, right? The apostles saw Jesus Christ earlier. He sees Jesus Christ later. It's at a different time, but that's not this. That's the PG version of this term. This term right here, one untimely born, this is what this means. And again, this is graphic. Okay, this isn't PG Bible here. The term that Paul's using there is one of an aborted fetus, a miscarriage, or a stillborn. It doesn't imply just one untimely born. It's one born too early that dies. Now, you may look at that and say, well, why is he using that term? What is he talking about there? Why bring up such a graphic, gross, and really just sad image? Why would he call himself that as I am a miscarriage, I am a stillborn, I'm an aborted fetus? Why would he say that? Okay, look at how he goes on to explain who he was. It says, for I am the least, this is verse 9, of the apostles, unworthy to be called an apostle. Why? Because I persecuted the church of God. This is how Paul describes himself. I think this term is not a term that Corinthians used. I think this is a term that Paul's using of himself. He's basically saying this, guys, I was living this life, killing Christians in religious delight. He thought it was a service before God himself, that God smiled every time somebody lost their life for believing in this blasphemer, Jesus Christ. And Paul is saying, I was the weakest of the weak. As weak as an aborted fetus. Right? You would think a child, a baby born too early is the most dependent case of human life. Right? Weakest of the weak. Right there. And that's what Paul is saying of himself. I was the weakest of the weak, at the lowest point. In fact, I wasn't even alive. It's not that I was just dependent, I was dead. But then God's grace came through and met me on that road and changed my life. And God graciously brought my weak and frail soul back to life. And then he becomes a proclaimer of the message of Jesus Christ. What would it take for a persecutor of the church in the first century to change his worldview? I think it would take a resurrected revolutionary. A resurrected revolutionary. In church, Jesus Christ's resurrection is still revolutionary. It didn't just bring it to the first century Jews, to the first century Greeks. It didn't just bring it to James and bring it to Paul. It brings it to you. Because think about what the resurrection means for you. It means there's something after this life. And we can look forward to it. Do you realize that? There's something after this life, and I get to look forward to it. I don't have to fear it. I don't have to be scared of it. I don't have to be intimidated by it. I don't have to be crushed by loss, crushed by death. I mean, the agony, the anxiety, the depression, the darkness, when you enter into a funeral is thick. Because this person is gone. Gone. I remember trying to understand that as a 12-year-old boy who just lost his father. I will never see him again. Ever. No more Christmas, no more birthdays, no more ice cream cones, no more walks, no more nothing. It's all over, it's gone. They shut the box and the story's over. And that may sound morbid, but that's reality. Right? And we live in the fear of that death. And it changes how we live our lives right now. Right? YOLO, I'm only going to live once. I just get crazy, do some stuff, fill my life up with pleasure, fill my life up with everything. You know, faithfulness to one person, monogamy with one person, that's just kind of a crazy view. I need to sow my wild oats. I need to be a rebel. I need to enjoy myself because I'm about to die. But if you believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ, it changes everything. If you see that there's something after you can invest in now, it changes everything. It changes how you view your family. It changes how you view your safety. It changes how you view your goals, how you view your education, how you view your children, how you view your finances. It changes everything. It causes a revolution in your life, a worldview change. If you don't have to fear the after, it changes the now. And church, this is what I want you to think about as we kind of move to a time of reflection. We try to figure out, okay, sit with these things. I want to ask you a question if you're a believer, if you're a Christian. As you're kind of folding up your Bible and you're putting away things, and we're going to move to a time of communion, you'll see the lights dim and the band will come on stage and we'll sing a song together. Before we get to that moment, as you're zipping things up and getting ready to go, if you're a Christian, a follower of Jesus Christ, I just want to ask you one question. How revolutionary is the resurrection of Jesus Christ in your life? How revolutionary. Look what it did to James, his brother. Look what it did to Paul, the persecutor. How revolutionary is the resurrection of Jesus Christ in your life? If I looked at your bank account, could I see that it's caused a revolution in how you view your finances? If I looked at your family dinner table, as you're together teaching your kids and talking about life and the day and school and education, all things, would I sit there and say, something has happened with this family, the resurrection has caused a revolution in how they talk about their everyday life? If I were to go to your workplace, are you working any different than someone who does not believe in the resurrection? Is it really revolutionary? Has it really caused dramatic change? Has it shaped and shifted your entire worldview in another direction? Is the resurrection of Jesus Christ revolutionary in your life? Now, maybe you're not a Christian. You're still working through all these things, and you're skeptical about all of this stuff, and I get that. That's where I was when I was going to church for the first couple years. And so I'm glad you're here. I want you to know that you belong here. If you're still trying to piece this together, I just want to give you kind of a challenge. This is the most important event in history. Everybody can acknowledge that. There is no event in human history that has more impact than the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Zero, none, not even close. If it's the most important event in history, it should deserve your most efforts for research. You got to figure out if this thing's true, or if it's a hoax, or if it's just a very elaborate lie and conspiracy. But do me a favor, don't just stop and say, well, okay, I can just put it on the shelf. I'm not even going to worry about it. Don't do that. There's nothing more important than that event right here. Nothing more important to your life and your afterlife than this event right here. Explore it. Find out if it's true. And you may come to the conclusion that it's not true, and that's okay. You can believe different than I believe. I'm still going to love you, still going to care about you, still going to invite you to everything we do here. You don't have to believe what I believe for me to love you. But please do this. At least investigate. Don't get to the point where your life is tipping into eternity, where you're on your deathbed, where you're saying goodbye to your loved ones, and you think to yourself, man, I wish I would have maybe explored this topic a little bit more. Man, I really wish I would have investigated a little bit more. I really wish I would have pressed in this truth. I don't know what's going to happen right now. Now I'm kind of just punting at the end of my life, and I don't really know what to do, and we'll see what happens. Don't do that. Please don't do that. Please don't do that.